The sun rose slowly over the wide, dusty fields of the ranch. The wind blew gently, carrying the faint scent of dry grass and earth. In the distance, horses grazed quietly, their tails swishing as they moved. A small wooden house stood alone at the edge of the property, its paint faded and cracked from years of sun and wind. The townspeople often spoke of the woman who lived there, a quiet widow from China, and her young daughter who never spoke a single word. Many were curious, some even worried, but none dared to ask questions too closely. The widow was a strong woman. She moved with a quiet grace that seemed to belong to the land itself. Her black hair, streaked with gray, was always tied neatly behind her head. She carried herself with dignity, even though life had not been easy. Years ago she had lost her husband, and since then she had raised her daughter alone. The loss had left a deep mark on her heart, and she rarely spoke of it. To anyone who asked, she would only smile faintly and shake her head, leaving the past behind closed doors. Her daughter, a girl of about 10, was a mystery to the town. She never spoke, never called for attention, and rarely smiled. Yet her eyes told a story that words could not capture. They were large and dark, full of quiet intelligence and emotion. She moved with careful precision, tending the small garden beside their house, gathering vegetables or watering flowers with delicate hands. People often whispered about her as they passed, wondering why a child so young would choose silence over words. One morning, a rancher arrived in the area. He had bought land a few miles from the small town and had begun building a new life, far from the noise and busyness of other places. He was a kind man, practical and hard-working, with a deep respect for the land and its creatures. He had heard whispers of the widow and her daughter, but had never met them. The stories intrigued him, not in the way gossip intrigued others, but with a quiet curiosity that made him want to understand the truth. As he rode along a narrow dirt path near the widow's property, he first saw the girl. She was kneeling in the garden, carefully arranging a small pile of carrots she had just pulled from the earth. The sunlight glinted on her dark hair, and her movements were precise, almost ritualistic. He slowed his horse and watched her from a distance. There was something about her silence that spoke louder than any words could. Unlike the townspeople who assumed she was shy or strange, the rancher sensed her intelligence, her awareness, and her hidden strength. For several days he passed by the garden, leaving small gifts on the fence, a fresh loaf of bread from his kitchen, a bundle of flowers, or a simple toy for her to play with. At first the girl only observed. She did not take the gifts, did not look directly at him, but over time she began to accept them, picking them up carefully and placing them inside the house without a word. The rancher noticed her curiosity growing in subtle ways. She would peek through the window to see him working on his land or smile briefly when he waved. The widow watched all of this silently from her doorway. She was cautious and protective. She had learned over the years that trust was fragile, and strangers could not be allowed close too quickly. She remembered the hardships they had faced, the loneliness and the struggles that had shaped her daughter's silence. She feared that anyone who tried to rush the girl into speaking or drawing attention to her might hurt her emotionally, yet she could not deny the kindness she saw in the rancher's eyes. Unlike others, he seemed patient, gentle, and respectful. One hot afternoon, the rancher noticed something unusual. The girl had been working in the garden longer than usual. He rode closer and saw her staring at a small bird trapped in a fence. The bird struggled, its wings fluttering wildly. Without hesitation, the rancher dismounted and gently freed the bird. The girl watched him carefully, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and admiration. For the first time, she allowed herself a small smile, and it seemed to linger longer than usual. The widow, standing behind the door, watched silently but could not hide a flicker of relief. She knew her daughter had seen the rancher as someone trustworthy, someone who could act with care when it mattered most. Days passed, and the bond between the rancher and the girl grew stronger. He began leaving small notebooks and pencils by the garden gate. The first time she touched them, she hesitated, unsure what to do. But slowly she began to draw. At first, the pictures were simple: flowers, birds, the ranch itself. Then, over time, they became more detailed. She drew the house where she lived, the small table inside, and even the widow standing quietly in the corner. Each drawing seemed to express thoughts and feelings she could not yet say aloud. The rancher would leave short notes beside the drawings, simple messages like "Hello" or "I see your garden is beautiful today." The girl would respond with a line or a small sketch. This became their way of speaking to each other, a language that required patience, observation, and trust. The widow watched quietly from her doorway, realizing that the rancher was helping her daughter find a voice in a world she had avoided for so long. One evening, a small incident occurred that would change everything. A lantern in the girl's house had tipped over, causing a tiny fire to start in the corner of the room. The girl froze, unsure of what to do. The widow rushed in but struggled to reach the flames quickly. The rancher, passing by on his horse, saw the smoke rising and ran toward the house. He moved swiftly, extinguishing the fire before it could cause serious damage. The girl hid behind her mother, her eyes wide with fear and awe. The rancher's calm and decisive action showed her that she was safe, that he could be trusted not just with gifts or words, but with her life itself. After that day, the girl's trust in the rancher deepened. She began leaving more detailed drawings, sometimes showing moments from her past or small glimpses of her thoughts. The widow, seeing the progress, allowed the rancher to help with small chores like carrying water or fixing broken parts of the garden fence. It was a slow process, but each act of kindness strengthened the bond between them. The townspeople began to notice subtle changes. The girl, once invisible to most, now moved with a quiet confidence. She lingered by the gate to watch the rancher work, and sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, she would whisper a single word, barely audible, as if testing the sound of her own voice. Though she was not yet speaking freely, it was clear that something in her heart was beginning to change. The rancher never pressured her. He understood that trust and communication could not be forced. Instead, he focused on showing kindness through action, patience, and respect. The girl responded in her own way, gradually learning that speaking was not dangerous, that expressing herself could be safe and even rewarding. Even the widow, who had carried so much grief and worry, began to feel hope. She realized that the rancher was helping her daughter in ways she could not. He was offering a gentle hand, a steady presence, and a safe space where silence was respected but communication was possible. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her daughter might speak again, where she might find joy and confidence beyond the walls of their home. As the days turned into weeks, the rancher's presence became a quiet but important part of their lives. The girl's drawings grew more expressive, filled with detail and emotion. She even began writing simple words in the notebook, small sentences that revealed her thoughts. Each word was a victory, a step toward opening a door that had long been closed. And so, the quiet ranch on the edge of town became a place of slow transformation. A place where patience and kindness began to heal old wounds. A place where a young girl who had never spoken started to find a voice through trust, observation, and the gentle presence of a man who respected her heart. Though the sun still rose and set over the dusty fields, bringing with it the usual hardships of life on the ranch, there was now a quiet sense of hope. The widow watched her daughter from the doorway, and the rancher tended his land nearby, both knowing that the first steps toward healing had been taken. The silence, once so heavy, now held a promise of words yet to come, and the future, once uncertain, began to shine with possibility. Days passed slowly on the quiet ranch, but the air seemed lighter than before. The girl, once so silent, had begun to leave more drawings and little notes in the notebook the rancher had given her. Each page told a story of her world, her home, the small animals she saw, the garden she tended with care. She even drew herself sitting quietly in a corner, her eyes wide and thoughtful. The rancher studied these drawings with care. He could sense her thoughts, her fears, and the small joys she felt in the simple life around her. The rancher visited the girl and her mother regularly, always bringing something small, a basket of fresh fruit, a piece of cloth for sewing, or a small wooden toy he had carved himself. The girl was still cautious. She did not speak much, but she began to watch him more openly. She would peek from behind the door, or sometimes she would come near the gate to see him work. Her eyes, once full of doubt and silence, now held curiosity and a quiet trust. One afternoon, a sudden rainstorm swept across the fields. Dark clouds rolled over the horizon and wind whipped through the ranch. The girl had been outside tending her small vegetable garden, and she ran toward the house, her feet slipping in the mud. The widow followed closely, holding a basket, and the rancher rushed from his land to meet them. The rain poured harder, and the wind threatened to knock over the small wooden fence around the garden. The rancher acted quickly. He grabbed the fence posts and secured them before the wind could destroy the garden. Then he reached for the girl, steadying her as she slipped again. The girl looked up at him, and for the first time she spoke a word, barely audible over the wind. "Thank you." Her voice was soft, trembling, but it carried a weight of trust and relief. The widow standing behind her felt tears gather in her eyes. She had waited years to hear her daughter speak, and hearing even a small word was a miracle. From that day on, the girl began to speak more often, though still softly and cautiously. She would whisper words to the rancher when they were alone, her voice hesitant, like testing the sound of her own courage. She began to write in the notebook as well, pairing words with pictures, sharing her thoughts and dreams in ways she had never done before. The rancher encouraged her gently, never rushing, never forcing her to speak beyond what she felt comfortable with. Through drawings and notes, the rancher slowly learned pieces of her story. She had witnessed a sad event when she was very young, the death of her father. He had been sick, and she remembered the fear and sadness that had filled their home. After that, she had stopped speaking, as if silence could protect her from the pain of loss. Her mother had grieved quietly, and the two of them had survived alone, their bond strong but shadowed by sorrow. The rancher understood that the girl's silence was not stubbornness or shyness, but a shield, a way to keep herself safe from further hurt. The rancher's presence became more important to both the girl and her mother. He helped with chores around the house, repaired broken fences, and carried water for the garden. He spoke kindly, listened patiently, and respected their space. The widow, who had once been wary of strangers, began to allow him closer. She saw how the girl responded to him, how her eyes brightened when he arrived, and how she began to smile more often. Slowly, the rancher became a friend and protector, a steady presence in their quiet lives. One evening, as the sun began to set and painted the sky with colors of pink and gold, the girl and the rancher sat together in the garden. She had drawn a picture of a small house, a garden, and two people standing nearby, herself and her mother. Then she added another figure, tall and strong, with a gentle smile. She handed the drawing to the rancher. "I drew you," she whispered. Her voice was soft, but there was pride in it. The rancher looked at the picture and smiled. "I see it," he said gently. "You are very talented." The girl's eyes shone with a mixture of pride and nervousness. For the first time, she seemed to understand that speaking and sharing could be safe and even joyful. Weeks turned into months. The girl's confidence grew with each passing day. She began speaking more, first to the rancher, then to her mother, and occasionally to the few townspeople she trusted. Her words were simple, but they carried meaning and emotion. She told stories of her garden, of the small animals she observed, and of the drawings she loved to make. The rancher encouraged her, praising her efforts and always listening with care. One afternoon, the rancher noticed that the girl had drawn something different. It was a picture of a small bridge over a stream, and beneath the bridge there was a shadowed figure reaching out for help. He asked her about it gently, and she hesitated before speaking. Me," she said softly. "I was scared. When Father died." Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of years of fear and sadness. The rancher nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "It was very hard, and it is okay to feel scared. You were very brave." The girl looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. She had carried so much inside, and finally she felt that someone understood. The widow, who had been nearby, placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, squeezing it gently. She too had felt the pain of those memories, and seeing her daughter speak about them was both relieving and heartbreaking. Over time, the girl began to tell more of her story. She spoke of her father, of the love he had for her and her mother, and of the sadness she had felt after he was gone. She described how she had stopped speaking to protect herself, how she had feared that words could bring more pain. The rancher listened quietly, never interrupting, allowing her to share at her own pace. The bond between the rancher and the girl grew stronger with each passing day. She learned to trust him completely, not just with words, but with her heart. She discovered that speaking did not have to be frightening, that sharing her thoughts could bring comfort and connection. The widow watched these moments quietly, her heart filled with gratitude. She had feared the world might hurt her daughter, but now she saw that kindness and patience could heal old wounds. One bright morning, the girl took a step that showed how far she had come. She spoke clearly in full sentences, telling the rancher about a new idea for the garden. Her mother smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. The rancher listened carefully, praised her, and offered suggestions. For the first time, the girl felt that her voice mattered, that it could bring change and be heard. The townspeople began to notice the difference as well. The girl, once silent and withdrawn, now moved with confidence. She helped her mother with small chores, spoke to neighbors politely, and even smiled openly when she passed by. Her voice, once so quiet and hidden, was becoming a part of the world around her. The rancher's patience and kindness had opened a door that had long been closed, and the girl had walked through it slowly but surely. By the end of the season, the ranch had changed too. What was once a quiet, almost lonely place had become alive with conversation, laughter, and shared work. The girl spoke more freely, her drawings now filled with words and stories capturing the beauty of life around her. The widow who had carried so much sorrow found joy in hearing her daughter speak, laugh, and connect with the world once more. The rancher remained a steady presence, a friend, and a guide. He had helped the girl discover her voice, but he had also shown the widow that trust and patience could bring healing. Together they created a small community of hope, where silence could be respected but words were welcomed, and where kindness could transform even the quietest hearts. The story of the silent girl and the patient rancher became a quiet legend in the town. People remembered how a child who never spoke had found her voice through trust, care, and understanding. They remembered how a woman who had feared loss and loneliness had watched her daughter grow into her own strength. And they remembered how, in a small, dusty ranch far from the town, a simple act of kindness had changed a life forever. The girl now spoke openly, telling stories, sharing her dreams, and expressing her feelings without fear. Her mother smiled more often, her heart lighter than it had been in years. And the rancher, who had come as a stranger, had become a part of their family, a symbol of hope, patience, and the power of understanding. Life on the ranch continued, as it always did, with the sun rising and setting over the fields. But now there was laughter, conversation, and the joy of a voice once silent finally heard. The girl had found her words. Her mother had found peace, and the rancher had discovered the quiet but profound truth that kindness and patience could heal even the deepest wounds.